Welcome to the Matthew Moran podcast. Here you'll discover a series of in-depth conversations with some of the world's leading nature photographers, filmmakers, conservationists, editors, writers, and publishers. Gain unique insights into the lives of industry experts and the unsung heroes, their personal stories, creative processes, and how they make their passion sustainable. We also explore the role photography and filmmaking play in engaging audiences around the world about the global challenges facing wildlife. And despite the often grim statistics, we focus on solutions and discuss what each of us can do to contribute to conservation efforts. I'm incredibly grateful to all my guests who generously give up their time to share their wisdom, and I'm really excited to bring these inspiring conversations to you. This week, my guest is Sarah Leen. Sarah has had an incredible career, spanning more than 4 decades, and she continues to work tirelessly as an educator, photo book editor, and mentor. Prior to all of this, she started out as a photojournalist, and in 1980, she shot her first assignment for National Geographic magazine. She went on to shoot another 15, which included 5 covers. In 2005, she hung her cameras up to focus on editing and worked her way up to becoming the first female director of photography for National Geographic partners. I was so fortunate to meet Sarah a year ago at the Missouri Photo Workshop, and I'm so pleased we got to have this conversation, and I'm really excited about sharing it with you. A quick reminder before we begin to anyone who would like to support and help this podcast, you can do so now by visiting patreon.com/Matthew Moran podcast. And as ever, a big thanks to those who continue to support to keep them going. Here's Sarah. Sarah, thank you so much for meeting me. We got there in the end. And also, I cannot believe that it's nearly a year ago that we met at the Missouri Photo Workshop. That's coming up again, number 76. And I want to dive deep into that with you shortly. But just thanks for taking the time to come on. I really feel lucky with the whole variety of people that I've had on this podcast, from photographers, but it's always great to get editors on, editors with vast amount of experience like yourself. But you've also been from what I read, a very successful photographer, and you've kind of worn both hats in your career. So yeah, thanks so much for coming on.
It's totally my pleasure to be here and talk to you. It was wonderful to meet last year. And now it's, like you say, it's almost full circle, a year. The workshop's in a couple of weeks. So it's really nice to see you and have this chat. Thank you for inviting me.
You're very welcome. So the Missouri Photo Workshop, we will get into that, but I thought it'd be a good place to start. Well, Missouri, because that's really where you started, right? You studied at the Missouri School of Journalism. And, when you went there, I'm assuming that you already had an interest in photography, or, did that come out of doing that course, or did you already have an interest right from the beginning?
Yes, I started out as a fine art major, in sort of what we call here undergraduate, not graduate school, but the first 4 years. And we didn't have a photography teacher at the school, but one came in while I was there. So I was doing mostly printmaking, and I got interested sort of first in photography because I got very interested in transferring photographs to metal plates and etchings. And so I started taking pictures for that, but terrible pictures. But anyway, but I was only using parts of them, et cetera, as art, right? And then we had a photography teacher come, fine art. And so I took his class, and that's when I first got interested, but it was more, zone system, 4x5, and lots of different cross-processing and things like that. And then when I graduated, I was not good for anything. I mean, I couldn't get a job doing anything, right? So it was okay, I have to get a skill, and I started dating a guy who was a photojournalist, and I, would sometimes go with him, and I thought, okay, this looks great. You get to go to all these places, you can talk to strangers, your camera is this ticket to life. on all levels. So then I went back to school, to the journalism school.
Ah, okay. But of course, it's so funny you talk about that, whatever, 45 years ago, 46 years ago, and it's still kind of the same, this kind of attitude towards the arts and like, what am I going to do at the end of all this? And it took dating a guy to make you realize, actually, but of course, all of that stuff isn't useless. All of the stuff that you're learning during that fine art course, it goes in, doesn't it? And it does embed.
Yes. I'm very happy to have, that I had that opportunity because, I minored in like art history. So I have a pretty deep art history background. You're learning all kinds of things about aesthetics with all different kinds of art forms. And I think having that, that sort of shaped my eye, first as a photographer and then as an editor. I kind of always like to say for me, the sweet spot for me is the combination, the intersection of art and journalism. Those are the pictures that I love, so it's journalism, but it's also like art because image making is an art form, so any kind of photography is actually art, but I love it when journalism and art intersect. And those are the pictures I love and what I'm looking for usually.
And how do you put your finger on that? Because that's such a good point, where art and journalism meet. Is it? Yeah. Obviously, it's experience, but you'll have a feeling, from within.
I think it's, as an editor, I find it like it's very important to be in touch with like your feelings, right? Your emotions, like your reaction, even your physical response to something, right? Because all of that is telling you something, So, and when I made the switch from photography to editing, and one of the reasons why is because I felt like I was doing a lot of editing other photographers' work when I was teaching photo workshops, and I loved it. I loved doing that. And I felt way more confident as an editor than I ever did as a photographer. I was like a worrywart photographer. I worried so much. And, this was always my last assignment. And, it was terrible. And, but when I worked as an editor, I felt more decisive, more confident, more, and I loved like how I could help somebody. I loved how I could take their photos and work with them, and we could end in this place and they could kind of see their work in a different way, perhaps. And they could take that experience with them, So I don't know. I just really decided I want to do this. I'm doing this because I'm happier, So that's it. That's what happened.
I think it's such a great story. I always love hearing, people's stories about just worrying about stuff or, because I think in this world where it's an artistic, medium and we are literally exposing ourselves, when we come on Missouri Photo Workshop, it's really exposing and you feel vulnerable. And I say that to, people that have come on my workshops over the year, you're around strangers and suddenly, when it comes to the time when we're going to look at everyone's images, everyone kind of goes into their shell a little bit. And it's fascinating. And of course you go through the same thing. And yet when I was looking and researching your biography and other bits and pieces about you, you were regularly published by National Geographic and you got an internship, right? Is that what happened early on? Can you tell us a bit about how you got that? And then also, we can talk more as well about your work with female photographers, but I can't imagine there were too many female photographers working at National Geographic in the late 70s, early 80s.
There were some. I mean, there were definitely some. They had a staff. And there was, Jody Cobb, she was on the staff, and another woman, Bianca Levies, before her. But there were other female photographers working there. So there were some definitely role models when I was an intern. So I got the internship because there's a college photographer of the year contest. And I won that contest. And the internship was, a summer at the National Geographic. So, and the director of photography then, Robert Gilka, he was very supportive of women. He hired Jody and supported other women. And he used to come to the University of Missouri for different events, and I kind of got to know him. And I showed him my work, and he told me I needed to keep working. And I wasn't ready to come to National Geographic just yet, right? So,
yeah.
As a student, you learn the hard way sometimes. But
sure,
yeah,
but it makes you thicker. It makes you thicker skinned, right?
Yeah, and you just think, I'm so ready, for this. And I was always like shooting black and white at the time. So Geographic was color. So, what was I thinking? But anyway, so I went there for the summer, and it ended up being like 6 months because I got a magazine assignment and stayed through to finish and edit that. And then
well, can you tell us about the assignment? This was your first assignment, right?
Yeah. So it was in Uganda. And it was a family, a Canadian, and he was a doctor, and he had married a Ugandan woman. And there was a period of time in Uganda where Idi Amin came in and took over, and it was about 6 or 7 years. And so they were out of the country during that time. So then he was deposed, and they were sent. They were going to go home, and they pitched this idea, this return to Uganda story. And so I went with them. So I spent I think at least 2, almost 3 months there living with them and traveling around Uganda and her family and their life, et cetera. So, and it was a huge learning experience for me. I mean, it really broke me in a whole different level of professionalism, because it was transparency film. This is the dinosaur days. Transparency film, so I never got to see any pictures. And I had to travel from Uganda to Kenya to Nairobi to ship the film out.
Oh, wow.
So, and then I would get a phone call, and they'd tell me how it was looking and whether my exposures were okay and stuff like that. So I didn't really see any of it until the end. Got back, and then we edited and put together a story. So it ran, and that was 1980.
Incredible.
I know, it was pretty
I know.
I learned so much. I learned so much. And the interesting thing, I think one thing about it is Alex Webb came over there and was photographing there too. I didn't ever meet him, but later I saw his photographs, and the difference, his work now is so amazing. And I thought, okay, I got to double down on this, right? I'm studying this guy's work. I totally studied Alex's work, thought how he addressed these situations. And I learned I learned a lot. It was tough, but I learned a lot.
That's amazing. And then from then on, did you continue as a freelancer with them, or did you take on a staff job? What happened? It was a success, right? I think you can't pull the wool over anyone's eyes. If you get the story published, they're not doing it because they feel sorry for you. It's total merit.
Great. Yeah, it was, good. But Bob said, you need to get a job. I wasn't at all ready to be there. I needed to be. So he called this man out in Kansas, Rich Clarkson, who at the time was in a very photocentric, Midwestern newspaper, really great staff of people, several who went on to work further at the Geographic. And so I went there for about almost 2 years. And that's where I really learned how to be a professional. His was like the school of hard knocks. It was very tough love. People were tough. And I was the only woman on that staff. But I was kind of used to that, in the business at the time, being one woman, maybe two. At the Philadelphia Inquirer, which I also worked at later after Topeka, there were probably 3 or 4 women on that staff. So they're around. But, I feel like I've always felt like being a woman in this business is a huge strength. It's and even more so these days, the more people kind of are afraid of one another in a way, being a woman is much more easy. People find women as much of a threat, if you're out there in the playground photographing the kids, and it's just all kinds of things, letting you into their homes, I found it to be a real advantage.
That's really interesting you say that, because I spoke to Karen Eigner about this, and she, for the
Mm-hmm.
last few years, has had many photo stories in the Wildlife Photographer of the Year. And there's this killing contest one.
Mm-hmm.
And, she's around all these macho guys. And I said to her, like, how do you do it? How do you get in and get that access? And she said exactly what you just said. She said it's like almost the one thing where being female is an advantage, because they also want to show off to you. And then, you're there, doing your thing and doing your photojournalism thing. But at the same time, you are not a threat to them.
And then Karen and the field that she's in with natural history is very dominated by men. And she's the standout for sure. The other thing is the cultures. So if you're in, like, say, working in a Muslim country, you can be with the women or you can be with the men. It's fine. It's like where the men can really only be with the men.
Sure.
Right. It's much harder for the men to be with the women. So you have like this kind of this like advantage in some ways, I think, especially in other cultures too, which is really nice.
And another thing I was just thinking as you were talking about, your work experience. Okay, so you had this great opportunity. The internship led to the first published story, but actually it's, sometimes I think we can all be a bit guilty of holding National Geographic up as the holy grail. And of course, every photographer does want to be published there, but there are many, many good institutions out there, many, many good newspapers where all of these people like yourself, and including many of the photographers that I now follow as a consequence of the Missouri Photo Workshop, are really putting out such good work, working still with local newspapers, telling great stories, and learning, like you, as I'm sure as well, learning in a hard way, and especially in an era of social media that's so challenging.
Yeah, I agree. I do think there's, we know how challenged media is in terms of there's so many papers have folded. It's just challenging because we're all online, and so print publications are struggling. This is for sure, but there are also lots of other online possibilities. One of the bigger problems is they pay less for online usage of images than for print. And also, I think because photographers are makers, we make things, we like to make things. So we like the object of a book or a magazine, your work published in print. And every photographer I know and work with all want to do books. Everybody wants. And because we're makers, it's either that or they want prints. Want to make prints and be in a gallery or something, because that's the nature of being an artist.
Sure. Sure.
And I think that, but I think with crowdfunding, so many photographers are doing books now with crowdfunding. I mean, there's all kinds of different ways of getting your work out there. That we didn't have, and like you're saying, how many good people are out there working? Well, because of the internet, we know that we can see work from all around the world, right? And that is so important and exciting to see all that talent that was kind of buried to us when we didn't have the internet. I mean, you might go to the bookstore and you'll see some books from other countries or other photographers, but it was a little harder, than it is now to see a wider variety of work. Yeah.
And I was going to this forced me to jump ahead to a question I was going to ask you later, but it's relevant now, is how do photographers, photojournalists stay relevant in a social media age with so much noise? I mean, I guess it's easier for someone like you. You've got your finger on the pulse. You've been so well connected over the years. You can see, you're doing all these workshops, not just Missouri Photo Workshop, Mountain Photo Workshop. So you're seeing lots of young people over years. So you can kind of see, but like, how do we find the good photographers in the social media age outside of the bigger institutions?
Well, it takes, I think it's easier on the end of the editor, a bit easier on the end of the editor to find the photographers, but it's harder for the photographer maybe to be found. Right? Because there's so much out there. I mean, definitely social media, grants, getting grants, crowdfunding projects, getting your name out, getting yourself out there, like teaching workshops is a way to get yourself, because then you meet all the students that are in your class, attending, There's so many photo festivals. There's amazing photo festivals. You know, RL does portfolio reviews. Perpignan, you know, Visa pour l'Image does portfolio reviews. Houston, yeah, they do a month's worth of portfolio reviews. I find portfolio reviews a really good way to, you know, even no matter kind of what level of photography you're at. I often encourage photographers who are kind of established and they've been doing it for a while to go do portfolio reviews, because it's a great way to meet somebody, meet the people who are actually hiring and paying for photography or exhibiting photography, because you have them for 20 minutes, just you, their full attention, whether it's an online review or an in-person review. There's lots of online ones too. So, you know, and I love portfolio reviews. It's like getting a Christmas present every time I sit with somebody. I don't know what they've got. I'm going to open the box and see, you know, and it's so exciting to meet new photographers and see their work. And I think that taking advantage of that possibility, because if you try, it's much harder to break into somebody's workday. You know, they've got meetings, they've got this, they've got their deadlines, and you're sending a pitch, which I think you still have to do and must do. But it's a little harder because they're thinking, oh, I don't have time to read that right now. And then some days might go by and it goes down in the email, or, you know, so it's, I think these other opportunities for you to have that one-on-one with somebody is like really a great way. But it all takes time and some money too, to go to these festivals, to, you know, some portfolio reviews are paid, lots are free, but it's part of the business, I think.
Yeah, I think that's really, really great advice. And in fact, as you were talking, it was exactly what I was thinking. You know, I'm a little bit like you as well, in that kind of underconfident, like, oh my God, you know, what am I doing? And, you know, I go through everyone goes through those moments. You know, I'm in my late 40s now. I've been doing this 20 years. You know, I've done well, right? I've made a pretty good living. But when Karen, she was the one, when I interviewed her back in 2018, she was the first person to tell me about the Missouri Photo Workshop. And she said, oh yeah, you should go on it. You know, totally gets you out your comfort zone. And that's just was the year my daughter was born. So there's no way I was going to be going anywhere. And then I interviewed Jasper Doost. He did it. He said exactly the same thing, independent of her. A few years later, I met Morgan Heim. She did it. And then she said, oh, you should do this workshop. It gets you out your comfort zone. And then last year, I met this young Spanish photographer at a photo festival in Norway. And he'd just done Missouri Photo Workshop. And he said, oh yeah, you should do it. It gets you out your comfort zone. I was like, okay, I've got to do this. And obviously I was really lucky. And, you know, this places, like you said, these things are costly and they're limited. So I don't take that for granted, but it was better than I think anyone could ever really, you know, portray it. It was so good. And I had those moments. I had those humbling moments, you know, going to your faculty and your tutors with what I thought was a great idea. And, you know, one of the big things I learned on this, well, one of the many big things I learned on this workshop was, you know, you can't photograph the past.
But the story you ended up with was fantastic.
It was fun.
That story with the woman with the donkeys.
Yeah.
That was so visual. That was such a great story.
It was, yeah. I mean, it was funny because, you know, I'd had these two ideas, rejected. And I remember, you know, you start running out of time because you've only got a week to produce a story. And it was a little bit out of town. It was like 45-minute drive. And I got there and I was supposed to have a meeting back at the headquarters. And so I couldn't make it. So I just phoned Gabrielle and Randy and said, look, I think this is going to be a good story. And this woman's actually got a donkey in her house. And then they basically gave me, that was when they gave me the green light. Like, she's good, don't worry about it.
Stay there.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Great.
But look, we've talked about it. We've talked about it, assuming all the listeners know about it. But maybe you could, you know, it would be great if you could talk a bit about that workshop and the history of it, if you don't mind. Yeah. And we can find out a little bit on the Missouri Photo Workshop.
I have a big history there. So, because I went to school there, you know, and the University of Missouri Journalism School, they produced the workshop. So, you know, I started out as a lab rat, right? As a student, everybody gets recruited to work for it.
Yeah.
And we can meet, photographers and the faculty. And that's where Bob Gilko was on the faculty, the director of photography at Geographic. I started out, and that's when we were processing film, and contact sheets, and they would select, and then we would make, like these, some kind of like black and white slides. It was all black and white. Anyway, so then I started with that. And I did that for 1 year. And then I took the workshop, like the next year, and had, just barely scraped by. I mean, I didn't get a story. They were very tough, very, very tough. And there was a panel of 3 at the time. And they just wouldn't approve anything. Wow. It was Wednesday and I hadn't gotten a story, and you're dying by then.
Of course.
You're like, that's it. Well, nice career. So, but then I stumbled into something, that actually was really, it was I don't want to go on too long, but it's basically a group of alcoholics that had kind of created this community, and they had like a sober driver who would take them to the liquor store, and they all hung out at this woman's house. And, and so there was this kind of strange community of people, and they just let me come in, and so I just started taking photographs. I didn't even go back to get it approved. I said, I got it. I have to take some pictures here. I'm here. I'm in it. Like you were there, you're in it. I better get going. Right. So, and it turned out well. And, and I got good. I only had day and a half, or something to do it. But lots of stuff happened in this short amount of time. So it worked out well. And then after I was, several years later, I came back as faculty, and I taught for a while there. And then I had a pause once I was editing, started as an editor at the Geographic when it was no longer photographing. I took a pause because that job was so demanding.
Yeah.
And then I started back up again about 5 years ago or so.
Oh,
and I've been doing it every, I'll be going again in a few weeks.
Amazing.
So now I'm back on the faculty.
Yeah, it's so wonderful. And I think it feels to me, and I don't know whether it's like this in the States, but obviously I'd heard about it just in my little small world of conservation photography and natural history photography, but it still feels a little bit understated, even though it has this incredible history. I mean, last year was the 75th anniversary. And we should also talk about actually the way it operates, this wonderful way of, you have 1 week to find and tell a story with only 400 frames. So tell us about why that limit exists.
I think it's, I think the structure, and it's a structure that I have used in workshops when I was teaching people more about storytelling and photographing. And I think what's so special is it really reflects a lot of real world experiences. Like, you have to come up with an idea in this area. You have to pitch it to an editor. You have to be able to answer their questions about the story. Like what? So you need knowledge. You need knowledgeable. You need to be able to say, yes, I have access. These are all boxes that have to be ticked if you're pitching a story to National Geographic or Stern or Gayo or whoever, right? And then the limit of the 400 is to, slow people down, so that you are not just taking, you're really thinking about what are the photographs you need for this story. You're seeing, you're not doing like just blanket, photography where you're just photographing everything. So I think that's a certain discipline is on yourself to really see, to really figure out your compositions, to watch the light, be waiting for those moments. So your attention is really on. You can't just go crazy and photograph everything. So with only 400 frames. And then my actually one of my favorite parts, then you work with your team, edit, and then we have like a final show, which is always super exciting and so great to see all the other teams' stories.
Yeah, it's magic.
Yeah. One of my very favorite things, though, also about it is the print show for the community. I mean, and tearjerker.
People in tears, like, oh my God.
I'm almost in tears doing it because, especially the photographers that I'm working with, I know so much about these people working with the photographer, and there they are. And then it's like, there's Mrs. Smith. Oh my gosh, I have to say hi. And it's like, she doesn't know me, but I'm just like, thank you so much for having our photographer. Seeing them look at the pictures of themselves. Oh my God. It's like
just one. It's I mean, I'm getting goosebumps remembering that moment now, because I think that's one of the, well, there are obviously just so many great things, but yeah, you're going into this town, and also like the workshop does such a good job of prepping the town that we're coming.
Oh yeah.
And we were in Sedalia last year, and everyone was, oh, you're here for the workshop, and oh yeah, I heard about that. And of course there was the exhibition there from 1980.
Yes,
that was the last time it was in Sedalia, and these wonderful stories of Jim Curley, who's legend of the workshop, found this woman in her mid 40s, and she was like one of the only black kids in this all white school, like all of that kind of stuff. It's just incredible. And also, speaking of Jim Curley, and this is again the great thing, like your experience of just being around these great people who have time. Which is also a big issue, just to have conversations with. And I had 2 really great conversations with him. And one of the things that really stood out from one of them was, my natural thing. And I think it's why I initially went into photographing animals, was because an animal doesn't really care as long as you can get close enough and you're not disturbing it, that you're taking a photograph of it. It doesn't have that self-consciousness. And so then you're suddenly in the world of people. And how do you do that? How do you break down those barriers? And he said such a good thing to me, which now seems so obvious, which is, look, he said, if you go into a room of 100 people, actually quite a few of those people will want to have their photograph taken. They want their story told because they want their lives validated. And I think you really get that sense. And it's just like you say, from the final show, when the community come down, it's like, oh yeah, our ordinary town, our ordinary community actually is pretty extraordinary.
Yes, that's exactly right. I love that. And I find that to be so true. It's like and the other thing is, like, I think it's so important is it kind of teaches you a little bit about being open to serendipity, open to like whatever is coming toward you and not being resistant to it. Like I always say, people, like when I left the Geographic in late 2019, I said, I'm going to say yes to everything anybody asks me to do, no matter how, I think, even if I think, oh, do I really want to do that? I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to say yes. I'm just going to be open to whatever comes my way, because the one door opens the next door that opens the next door, right? And I think that being a photographer and just in life, I always encourage, like, they say, hey, do you want to see my tractor? You go, yes. I'm dying to see your tractor. And then if they say, would you like a cup of tea? Yes. It's yes, because all of that is like part of your job, is to be curious and discover things. And you don't get that by saying no to things. You get it by yes. And so I think yes is like the most important word for a photographer. It's just say yes. Just go see. You don't know what you get in the barn to see the tractor, and you find out they have the world's largest bull, and it's a blue ribbon winner, and they raised it from a calf, and there's this whole story, but you just went to see the tractor,
Yeah.
And the better thing, so I find that to be like such a gift. It's such a gift, these people who give their lives to us as photographers, that we're so gifted when that happens.
Oh my God. Yeah, completely. And that attitude, I think, is a good one to have, like, in life, right? Yeah, that's real cup half full. That's fortune favoring the brave. And it's true. Because we can find a million reasons to not do it. But like, gotta run, Yeah, completely. Since the workshop, and I was so pleased that I did it last year, because I've been doing this like slow burn, long-term project in a cemetery. And since then, I got access to the gravedigger, and he's been there 30 years, and his dad was there as the gravedigger for 30 years before him. And so he lives on site four nights a week. And right opposite him are his parents, who are both buried in the cemetery.
Oh, wow.
And he's a big guy, 6'5", huge character. And when I first went to this cemetery, and I thought, oh, it'd be great to, take some photos of him or maybe make some film of him. And the chief executive was like, yeah, no, he always says no because he's doing his own thing. Apparently he was writing his own book or whatever. And then I just thought, I can slowly work on this. I think I can get access. And again, the skills that I learned on the Missouri photo workshop about approaching people and saying, look, I'd just love to take some pictures of you. What do you think? And I like that about relationship building, because that, from my experience, like you mentioned, access, that's about being a people person. That's about being, nice, being interested, being curious, all the things that you just said, because photos really are nothing without proper access, either to people or places. So I love hearing all of that. It's so, and we're not even talking about taking pictures, right? It's just, there's that emotion.
It's the emotion and the experience that you have as a photographer. I mean, it's humbling and beautiful when you have that chance to really photograph people that way, with taking the time, people, it's just, wow, it's just such a gift. I was too addicted to it for quite a long time.
Yeah, no doubt. Before we move away from the workshops, I had one thing that when we met and spoke, and a big lesson for me, and it's kind of it's technical, but I think it would be interesting for the listeners. And people have been banging on about this to me. Is like getting rid of wide angle lenses, just sticking with short prime lenses, and those. I remember one of the lectures they talked about visual bento boxes. Keeping everything square. And you told this great story about this young guy, I think, who came on the workshop with a 14 millimeter lens, and you were like, yeah, why don't you just give me that and I'll hand it back to you at the end of the week. So
it wasn't at the workshop. It was actually a magazine, Nat Geo magazine story.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, they had gone out and photographed with some, crazy wide, really, really wide.
Yeah.
And I feel like when I look at pictures, I really don't want to be thinking about what lens you used.
No.
That already is like a demerit for me. If I'm thinking about the lens, like, whoa, is that a 18? What is that? So, and they photographed a lot of people with this very, very wide lens and a lot of lens distortion.
Yeah.
And I was kind of like, do you not like these people? Because I feel like it's making them so grotesque, with this lens. And I just said, yeah, let's just put that away. Let's not use that anymore. Right. And move into like, I don't want to know about your lens. Don't let me see it in the photo. But yes, I think that it's fake drama, like a false drama. It's like you're trying to make something that maybe doesn't have very much drama, have more drama sometimes by using the lens, or, you're in a small room and you're trying to get more in. So it's a challenge, but it's definitely doable. And I see less and less of that these days.
Yeah.
I think there was a period, where people were using really wide lenses, but inappropriately.
Sure.
For my taste.
Sure.
But I see less and less of that.
You kind of touched on it, and it would be nice to go back in a little bit more about, you hanging up your cameras, but you did end up doing, was it 16 assignments in National Geographic in the end?
16 and like 5 covers.
Great.
Sort of until about 2004, 2005.
Yeah. And let me just interrupt you very quickly there, because this is a quick question, because I'm really curious. Like at this time, up until 2005, 16 assignments, covers, again, from the outside, this is like, wow, holy grail. She's National Geographic. Like, were you making a good living at this time? Did it pay?
Because the assignments were long back then. I mean, when I was, I had the pleasure of working for the magazine when they had like 10 million subscription,
Yeah.
And I think the first story that I did post, that my very first one, Uganda, I did one on the US-Canada border. And I don't even know how long I worked on that. It felt like forever. I was like begging for it to be over, because it just went on and on and on. And, we didn't even have a budget. I never knew what the budget was, right? That's obviously changed dramatically over time. But I had, 4-month assignments, and you could make pretty good money.
Yeah.
Get a healthy day rate and all your expenses paid for 4 months out of the year. I also was teaching workshops. It's not so different than from today, in terms of like you do lots of different things to make a living. I was married, so I had my husband's income too. So that was helpful to balance it. But yeah, I made a living, but it's much harder now, like Geographic, the assignments are shorter, and they were getting shorter through even the period of time that I was there. And then we did have budgets, and et cetera. All that kind of came in pretty quickly in the early 90s for sure. But I still had, my two favorite stories I worked on were both in Siberia, and each one of them were about 4 months, but two separate trips, like 10 weeks. A trip and then go back and another 10 weeks, something, like that. So, it was an amazing time, and it's much more difficult now I think just overall to make a decent living with editorial day rates. Most people are doing other kinds of work, commercial work or workshops or getting grants and, all kinds of things to, keep a roof over your head.
Yeah. And tell us why those two were your favorite of all your assignments.
Well, I'm sort of out, I have Scandinavian and Canadian roots in my family. So I've always been interested in the North. And I like cold weather, actually, which is one reason why I'm up here living in Maine now. And I think that they were the first one was Lake Baikal, and the second one was the Kamchatka Peninsula. And people hadn't been there before me. It wasn't like, oh, go photograph in Japan where there's a million photographers have been there all over the place. So I was like a rarity, So this is the early 90s, and perestroika was just happening. So things were opening up. Russia was changing.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I didn't see another English speaker for 4 entire months in Lake Baikal. I never met anybody who could speak English. I had a guy Sasha, who, bless his heart, most patient person on the planet. The only guy I could speak to, and he was my translator and guide and everything. So in Kamchatka, there was more. That was like about a year later. That was more open, but nobody had been to Kamchatka because it was a nuclear submarine base and it was closed even to Russians. So It was just opening up. And so I kind of really like that. I like going where like nobody is.
Yeah, that's that's the true thrill of wilderness that you just don't, it's impossible to get right now.
Yeah. And I really, most Baikal for sure, it was like time travel, right? We had, well, of course, there was no internet or cell phones or anything. I think I spoke to my husband once in 2 months, and of course we had an argument, of course. So anyway, about how long I was gone. And, I was sending telexes back to the office. I had to send telegrams from one village to another village to get in touch with people. So it was, there was lots of villages where there was, no electric and, so it was really like kind of getting a chance to see what it was like to live in the past.
Yeah.
People who are, fishing culture, and they're picking the berries in the August off the tundra, and like this kind of lifestyle that became so simple and essential and primal, and I kind of loved it. I loved having that opportunity to live that way, and I learned a lot of Russian. I learned Cyrillic right off the bat, the alphabet, so I could read signs, and so I was really working on language, because I love languages, and it was really special.
It's amazing as well, because you haven't once mentioned or talked about a single photo that you were proud of from these stories. It's totally about the experience, right?
Yes, but actually, I think I did take my best photography.
Great.
There.
Okay. And it was not a criticism at all.
No.
I love it. I just think it's yeah.
Well, I have all those pictures, and experiences in my head, but it was those experiences that also, directed my photography. And also, I always feel like my favorite color palette is pretty not so colorful, right? And I was always like, please don't send me to anywhere like a jungle, First I die of the heat and I can't photograph green, I just couldn't see, so it was nice there, it was a very neutral palette and horizons and I think I did my best photography there, really.
That sounds amazing.
I still like those pictures.
That's great. I'm gonna have to go. I've been a subscriber since '94, I think. So I mean,
91, 93. I think those were the 2 years they were published.
Okay, I'll see if I do have a stash like of not so. Yeah, I'm gonna dig them out. Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah. It was great fun.
Awesome. And so did from that period, like 2005, hanging up your cameras, was it a conscious decision? Did it happen gradually, or were you just like, I'm done? Like you mentioned earlier, I love editing. This is the direction I'm going to take. Was it very clear to you, or did it happen over a long period?
It was kind of quick because there was an opportunity for editor's position at the magazine, at the Geographic, and I had been teaching and doing editing, but I thought, and I was always in the back of my mind, I think maybe I'm going to move into this someday. But then this opportunity came up and the editing jobs at the time didn't open up very often. So I thought, well, I'm going to apply because they know me. And I don't have really any professional editing credentials. Like I had never worked for anybody as an editor before. So and also Chris Johns, he was the head of the department of photo editors. They called it illustrations back then. And he was also moving up to be editor of the magazine. And he was a photographer. And I had worked with him in Kansas at that first newspaper that I worked at, right? And so he knew me. And so I thought, well, this is probably my best chance. I better try. And I had an assignment. I was working on assignment at the time. But so I did, and I got the job. So I completed the assignment and joined the staff and never looked back.
Yeah. And you don't miss it? The photographing part?
No, actually, it's funny. I don't, which, is kind of like weird, I think, in a way. But I got so consumed by editing and working on these stories and working with it that I just, it was not ever a push-pull. I mean, I actually did photograph a cover for them that had to be done in the studio because I was around. I was right in the building and they needed something. And I said, oh, well, yeah, I can do it. I can light, I can do it. So I did one that was the last thing I photographed for them was this cover in the studio. But yeah, I don't know. I was so fulfilled by what I was doing. And I just, turned the page.
Brilliant. And during that period, okay, you say you didn't have those credentials, but along the way, were there opportunities for professional development as a photo editor and honing those skills? Or was it just literally absorbing because you're around such great editors?
Well, as a photographer working for the Geographic, you're involved in the editing. And the sequencing of, especially back then, they would bring you in to edit and with the editor and also for the layout. They don't do that anymore. But so I learned a lot working on those stories, not just making the photographs, but the editing and the thing. So you had to vote kind of the whole process. So I learned a ton like that. And then my husband was working on he's a designer. He was creative director there for a while. And he was working on some books. There were these day in the life books, and they were farming a bunch of them out. They did a whole bunch for a while, and to edit. And so I would edit with him on those and help work on those books, and it was just so much fun. So I had editing experience, some, but maybe it's not like I worked at the New York Times as a photo editor or something, and then I'm applying for the job, right?
Sure.
It was, but they were, yeah. So I jumped in and I did that until 2013.
Mm-hmm.
and then got promoted to director of the department. Director of photography.
And so often, I was curious about this because so often as you move up, and it sounds great, and you've got more power, but then you just end up managing more people, and it's the politics and the headache.
Exactly. Now it was like a huge honor, right, to become director of photography. Here I was. I would just, wish Bob Gilka had still been alive to see that, right? Who had been the first director of photography that gave me my start. So, but yeah, it was great. And there's lots of parts of it that I loved because I love being able to promote, the photographers I wanted to get into the magazine, and I had a lot more control of that. And, but yes, it's a management job. I think there were like 30 people between the studio and the photo engineering and the magazine. And then there was Traveler magazine. And so I was like above the person who did the senior photo editor there. And then we started having digital and online. So it was a lot. Yeah. And like you said, we're going to meetings all the time. And I was in charge, the budget and everything. So, that was 26 years, I felt like, and I was the final word sort of on, what got published. Like the editors did their jobs, and we'd always have a conversation about I would think, what about this photographer? And they'd say about that photographer. So we would decide together and then they would do it. But I was like kind of the final box to tick on the photographs in the story. Right. So I could say, well, what else you got in terms of the lead or something like that. Right.
Sure.
But I wasn't really editing. Like I think I did like one story. I did like two, like at the very beginning and at the very end, I did two things where I edited, but mostly, it's a management job. Exactly saying. I felt like I was getting so far away from my true love. I didn't want to do that anymore. Right. So I just felt like I wanted to get back to having my hands on the photographs, and working with the photographers more directly. So,
it sounds like you dove straight into that, especially with the story you told us about just saying yes to everything. It was like the antidote, of being a director.
And I actually, I took a workshop with Alex Webb and his wife. They were doing about editing, an editing workshop with them down in Oaxaca. And because I felt like, I had edited a book at the Geographic before I left, which was about photographs of women through the 125 years of Nat Geo photography. And I just really wanted to edit books. That's why I love photographs. I mean, all of these books, photo books, all the ones over here you can't see, photo books, and they're piled up, so I have a total addiction. And it's my husband, I keep saying, will you build me more bookshelves? He's like, if I build you bookshelves, you'll just fill them up.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. It's the backpacking thing, isn't it? The bigger the backpack, the more stuff you'll take.
So anyway, I thought, I know how I edit and what I do, but I want to see how other people do it. Right. So I took workshops, listened to a lot of podcasts, and people talking about editing.
And this is all after you left.
This is after I left.
Yeah, I love that.
I thought I just wanted, to suck up knowledge, to be better, to make myself better, because I know how to edit for a magazine. But editing for a book is like a whole different, like 3D chess, it's like a lot of other layers and options and stuff like that. So
we'll go into that in a bit more depth, because I know that was one of the things that you were interested in talking about, that difference between, editing a photo story for a magazine and editing a photo book. And one other thing I was going to mention from when you mentioned them before was, despite the digital revolution, it didn't manage to take over coffee table, beautifully produced photo books, that. And I remember at a time, like after I published my first book, I looked into and went down the road of doing like an iPad publication where you could, do an ebook, but it just it was clunky. Like the technology wasn't quite there. And then actually it never really took off. I remember just seeing, I can't remember, it might have been Flip Nicklin did this book about whales called Among Giants. I don't know if you remember that. And he did a really nice iPad publication. And I guess less people are having iPads these days as well. But you would, you'd swipe through, you'd have it horizontal, you'd swipe through, you'd see a beautiful picture of a humpback whale. And then there'd be a little down arrow. So then you could swipe up, and then some audio of the humpback singing on how he got the photo. And that's like an immersive experience, but it's different, right? Yeah. It didn't kill. I'm thankful because, I've published 5 books and I love the process. And
yes.
Yeah, I'm just thankful that digital did not kill that. So anyway.
It's a maker. You're a maker,
Yeah, exactly. That's where it came from. I remember now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think that also it's like, you can, really love that print on your wall. You just love it. Oh, I love it. I love walking by it every day. I love my prints. And I love some books. I love the physicality, the materiality, the paper, the everything. I love it. I can't say that for a website. I can't, or even a digital book. I don't fall in love with them like I fall in love with paper. Things on paper, right? And I think it's because we're like artists and we make things, but also every photographer wants to be in print, so in some ways. So I think that it won't go away. Actually, nothing goes away. It just changes.
Sure.
Black and white film, it hasn't gone away. Photographing, tin types have not gone away. Everything remains. It's smaller, more precious, maybe more expensive. I do portfolio reviews and I have students and young photographers come up and they're like, I shoot film, like,
wow.
Hello, and I'm like, I'm so glad you're using film, but it's like they just discovered some buried treasure, and it's the sweetest thing on the planet. I love it. But it doesn't go away. Things get recycled and they come back and get popular. So I think it's a heyday for photo books. Oh my gosh. I can't.
So you're doing a lot, right? So,
well, I think I've done 8 or 9 since I left, but it's such a challenge. I was talking, the magazine book thing.
Yeah.
So a magazine, same size every month, same paper all the time, pretty much the same set of typefaces, X amount of pages, and the Geographic can do some pretty long stories, sort of a bit of a formula in terms of the ratio of text to, images, always a map. So there's such a structure that you're working in, right? And then how do you make that structure exciting and tell the story and maybe look different than the next one and stuff like that? But it's still a lot of structure that you have. Well, a book, there's no structure. You make the structure, right? And so many decisions, like what size, what kind of paper, multiple papers. A lot of these are design decisions, but I think they influence the edit. All those things influence the edit. So you have to have those conversations and figure out what the photographer wants. Because I'm not only have I worked on books with single photographers, which is great, which is the easier. I've done these 2 books. For photo evidence about the war in Ukraine. Yeah. And first, each book had 90 plus photographers work in it. So I'm editing 100 photographers, and trying to create a structure, a storytelling structure inside these pages. And they're big books. The first one, really big.
With those, for example, like you're working for a publisher, do they already give you like a brief or a breakdown? We're going to have X amount of chapters, intros. No, it's just like, here's a bunch of material. Can you work it out for us, please?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I like to do. I like that, challenge of figuring out some of the structure and some of those things. I think the first book I did for photo evidence is Svetlana Bacheva was the publisher. They do a annual photo book prize, and they select a book that they have a jury, and a book is somebody's project is selected. And I met Antonio Facciolongo, Italian photographer, at a workshop my husband and I did it, the photo festival in Lucca. And he had this project, Habibi, and really loved it. Tuna quarter color, beautiful. And I worked with him on making a sequence. So after he won that prize, he came to me and said, I'd love you to edit the book. So that was my first one with them. And I got I just got deep, I get deep on stuff and really obsessed. And and it was about Palestinian prisoners and their wives are having children from sperm smuggled out of the prison.
Oh my God.
And so it's an amazing story. And so I wanted to represent the prisoners because he couldn't photograph in the prison. So he had videos though from inside the prison and all kinds of, so I watched 1 million videos and pulled still frames off the video that showed the prisoners. And we also got cell phone photos from the women, portraits, and did it on this, I had this idea to put it on this transparent paper. So they were ghosty.
Amazing.
They were, and so, I'm kind of got my hands in all of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. This is not your, standard, let's do this on uncoated. We have let's set the grid up here. This is getting really creative with paper.
Yeah, I make a big keynote with the whole sequence and everything. But then the designer, one that I worked with recently, we got on the phone and she had made her first pass, and I love the changes that she made. I'm dying to see what the designer's going to do with this and the changes that they bring to it. So important. It's really fun collaboration, with working with the designer and the photographer to, because it's their book and you just want them to be the happiest people on the planet when they're done. You're done.
Yeah, of course.
That's the goal. They better be loving it. So
100%, because it's also such a risk. It's such a risk. You go to print. I mean, I don't know. These days, there's so many checks and balances, but still, there's one typo, there's one double space that's in that book forever. All of that kind of stuff.
Is huge. Printing is huge, right?
Yeah.
But, so I'm just really loving it. Each one is a new challenge, and each one is kind of scary at the beginning, to get the idea of how best to tell this story and match it up with the photographer's dreams, taking cost into consideration because many of them are, raising the money.
Yeah, of course.
So there's a lot that goes into it, but it's really so much fun. I'm very lucky.
Yeah, that's great. It's also earned luck. It sounds like it to me, really throwing yourself out there in this stage of your career. It's just, it's very, very inspiring. I wanted to ask you also a bit about teaching. We talked already loads about Missouri Photo Workshop, and there really must be such a great feeling of giving back. And but you're also teaching editing workshops to other photographers. And you mentioned you just earlier on that you'd run one in Maine for female photographers. So maybe talk about that specifically, but also talk more broadly about your work as a teacher. I felt like there was, after I was no longer photographing, I didn't feel, I wasn't up on all the gear and the technology that I was. I just felt like, can't really teach this anymore, really. But I'm editing and I don't see much out there teaching, photographers how to edit their work and what they, how to organize first and then edit, right? So I came up with, a structure, like a workshop plan. And I started teaching at, I think the first time I did it was in Santa Fe workshops. And then I also did it up here in Maine. So I mostly did photo workshops up here in Maine, but then I started doing the editing workshops in Santa Fe and also in Maine, especially over COVID, did a couple a year online and did them in person when it wasn't COVID. And I felt like this was something I could offer that could be really helpful for photographers, right? So the idea is you bring a project to the workshop about, 75 photos, or could be a little more, could be a little less. And then we're going to organize them and we're going to come up with a sequence at the end of maybe 20 photos, or it could be 25, depends on the project.
And I'm going to also teach some, ways to organize and ways to set yourself up for editing, and talk about different elements of storytelling, so that while you're photographing, you're gathering these things that you may need when you edit. You might not need everything, but here's the items to go after. So depending on your story, and it's kind of like making a little movie, like, who are the characters? Where are we? What happens? Little details. Are details important? Are portraits important? What's important? And getting that. So then I'm like a gather, get out there and gather, right?
Yeah.
And then, we'll sit down and sort it all out and start to edit and build the story. So I love doing that. That's love doing that, because you start at the week, and some people just have this pile and like maybe a rough idea of what they think they're trying to say, but sometimes it's like, well, that may be what you want to say, but here's what you've got. So we're going to work with what you got, but if this is what you want to say, then here's what you need to get, right? Go back and bring these other things in. So at the end of the week, it's just a party. I mean, it's so happy, it's so happy because they're seeing it all kind of put together, and, getting to see, like, I did this,
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's just the best.
It's great, isn't it? Because I often say this phrase, photographers are like terrible editors of their own work, right? Again, that's true. But you're you're living proof of doing both. But obviously, maybe not so much at the same time. But it is fascinating, and it was so great having. It was the last book that I published. Was with two other photographers. And so we thought, okay, look, we need an editor on this project. And then just dumping everything on the editor was just great. They're looking at it with fresh eyes. And Keith Wilson, who I've interviewed on this podcast, did it. And he's old school. Like, he went out to the local high street Snappy Snap store with a thumb drive and printed, 450 images and laid them all out on the bedroom, and started to, play games with these pictures, and it was just so like off the screen, and let's tell a story with this.
It's so much fun. I feel like brilliant. I'm like I don't have children, but I feel like it would be, for me, it's like I have a child in the talent show. And they're out there like playing the violin, and I'm off stage going, playing the violin, playing the air violin, as it were, and their success and their moment, that's my success, all about creating that success. I think one of the reasons why photographers have so much trouble editing their work is because they were there. That the experience of being there, I say, a lot in portfolio reviews, and people are showing me work, and they got this long thing they're saying about some photo, and I'm saying, well, that's what I climbed the mountain photo. I climbed the mountain. I nearly got bit by a rattlesnake. It was so cold. I had to skip dinner and lunch. It was 10 miles, and I took this picture. I took this picture, and I'm like, yeah, I know, but I didn't climb the mountain, and I didn't see it and smell it, and I didn't skip lunch. So I didn't. Here's what the picture is doing and saying. It's not doing and saying all that. That's your experience, and you gotta separate that experience, and that is tough. That is very tough. And then just the idea of creating narratives. It's actually like there's a lot of logic into creating a narrative. And sometimes people think, they maybe don't want to do things sort of logically. But I'm thinking about the reader, the viewer too. Like, if you want them to get this, like, what's sort of some logical things that we can do to help somebody get through it? That doesn't mean we have stuffy. You don't have to be like in an order. But some things help somebody get the experience.
Rather than assuming that they're going to do it like it's in your head.
Or they're going to get what you're trying to do or say, I think that there's some things you can do when you're putting together to, I always say, like, get that sequence and tell the story out loud. Like, show the pictures to somebody else. I mean, a third party opinion, or second, for me, I call it the readership survey. It's time to do a readership survey.
Sure.
Show two pictures. We used to do this at the office. I used to do it all the time. Take two photos, this one or that one, push, and let's just bring in somebody else. Let's get somebody. I don't care. Here's someone walking down the hallway. Hey, come in here. Look at these 2 pictures. This is a story about otters. Which of these 2 do you like the best? And tell us why. And you get so much out of that, right? Because sometimes as the editor, I get so close to pictures. I'm like the worst editor in the fact that I can't give them up either.
Yeah,
it's really hard.
Yeah, it is.
Pictures.
But I guess it's that ruthlessness is because also you care, and that I think in deep down, which is going to be the one that's going to tell the story in the best way.
Yeah, and you need to go away and come back. Sure. You're looking all day. You need to go away for a couple of days, and you come back, and I'll come back to a sequence. I'll go, why did I do that? That's no good at all. So I keep like tweaking it and trying to get it, and then I show it, to somebody else. And I think one of the exercises I always do when I'm teaching editing is I have everybody edit not their story.
Okay. Yeah.
I have everybody edit another story.
Sure.
And it's easy peasy. They're doing it easy, right? They're doing it, and then they get their own work, and it's like, they don't know what to do with this, but it's good to look at other people's work and try to edit it. They'll teach you how to edit,
Completely. I mean, even, the small workshops I have been running for the last 10 years on the Heath, we have 6 participants and myself. And when we come to the editing side of looking at all of their work, I say, look, I could talk for the next hour about all of your images, but look, we've got 6, sets of eyes here, and everybody is from different backgrounds, different experiences. People notice different things, whatever your level. And that's the best part. When we make these prints and we put them down on the table and you've taken 6 people to the same area, it is incredible how differently everybody interprets the same area.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, that's a really nice reward and proof as well that you don't have to be like the best photographer in the world. I always think everybody, some people come on my workshops and they're like, oh, but I don't have a creative eye. I'm like, no, that's an excuse. You just need to work hard and go out and photograph and go back and make mistakes, because I think everybody really does. I've found photography for me is kind of, you've got to be a bit belligerent and just go back to locations over and over again.
Yes.
Just put the time in, and actually most people don't, which in some ways is, even though we're swamped with social media and a digital age, the cream does still kind of percolate, to the top, because whenever you hear the great photographers tell their stories in talks or whatever, it's because they put in the most unbelievable amount of effort and time.
Yeah. It's called work for a reason, right?
Yeah. It looks glamorous. You look at somene's,
there's a lot of work.
Yeah, exactly.
Work involved. But because anybody can get lucky,
Sure.
walking the street, walking around and take some really cool photos and everything, and photographing whatever you want. But as an assignment photographer, you got to photograph what I want.
Yeah.
The story we need told. So, in this area, in this amount of time, and that really separates the pros from the amateurs a lot, because they're able to take someone else's work, idea, and work on a story. And just building a story is so different than wandering around and doing single photos.
Yeah.
I think. It's not that you can't take a bunch of single photos like street photography and do a fantastic portfolio or something. But I think that the idea of narrative is like an additional skill.
Yeah. And another thing that I took home from the Missouri Photo Workshop, which I'm really struggling with, ever since, is this capturing of emotion. How do you capture emotion? And I photographed this gravedigger on 3 separate occasions, dig graves. What a privilege to go and watch this quite emotional thing happen. Especially in the West and the way that we deal with death. And then this guy's just working, right? He's got a digger and he's got an assistant. And I've actually been working with Morgan Heim with this work. I've been sharing stuff with her, and she's been great. And my kind of feedback to her is it's really hard to just not stop doing the process. Oh, he's got a spade. Oh, he's measuring. And actually, how do you capture those moments of emotion? And as a wildlife photographer, in the 90s growing up, it was all long lens. You got to capture behavior and that moment. It's almost like I'm coming back around to that, because that's really hard, right? capture the most
Yes.
dramatic moment. You know, I photographed foxes for 7 years. I probably count on one hand the amount of times I actually saw them fight and got a half decent picture. So
Right,
those moments
right.
of emotion between two people, or, you know, someone rubbing their brow or looking a bit tired or happy or whatever, like in
Right.
photojournalism, it's tough to get those shots.
Yeah, I think it's, I think often like the process is not the story. You know, the process is important. You need to be there to see it. You might find something while you're watching the process that makes a photograph, but it's kind of those like little things along the fringe and, you know, that really, I think, are the best photographs. It's that art and journalism intersection. Looking for that, because it's not a how to dig a grave, you know, or it's not a how to build the boat, right? I mean, but that doesn't mean we're not saying don't photograph that. Yes, of course, photograph it, but you got to go beyond the process and get the story and find those other little moments. And a lot, like you're saying, a lot of that is being there and putting the time in and watching. And I always think also in terms of as an editor, I always felt like I have an umbilical cord like to the photographer,
That's
you
nice.
know, and I'm looking at their pictures and I feel like I feel what they're feeling. So I can feel like when they're bored and they're taking pictures, but they're bored and I'm feeling bored looking at the pictures and I'm pretty sure they're feeling bored taking them and they're struggling in this moment, but they just keep taking them, you know, and try thinking it might get better.
It's the equivalent of, it's like photographer's writer's block, right?
Yeah. And they, you know, they're trying to break through on something, but they're just like, you know, and I would just say, I'd get on the phone. I'd say, okay, were you like, what's going on? You know, why did you keep photographing? I was so bored looking at it and I know you're bored taking that picture. So let's stop, like go have lunch, like go, you know, call your girlfriend, like do something else. Right. And start over, like leave that thing. Right. And give yourself a break, you know, and me a break too, you know, because I know you're like struggling here, but you can also see the excitement. So it's kind of like, you know, they see something and they're photographing and you can see the excitement. Oh, they're so excited. They're so happy. They're so grateful. They're standing in front of this thing and me too. And then you see something in the background and you go, oh, will they see that? Will they go there? Oh, yes. There they go. They see it. They're going to, you know, and you're like, it's like, you know, fantastic, you know? And so I feel like, if you feel excited looking at it, then we, the viewers, are going to feel it. So the emotion also comes from your emotion. So if you're seeing something that moves you, that you're so excited about, that you're thanking, you know, the heavens that you got to be here, you know, we're going to feel that.
Yeah.
We're going to feel it. You see something, the beauty, you see the irony, you see something and feel something, we're going to feel that.
Do you know what, Sarah? That is such good advice. And it seems futile now to ask because it is one of my questions about, you know, advising younger photographers. But that's what you've done, like this whole podcast. So people need to go in and just pull out like all of these amazing tips and nuggets of wisdom. And, you know, we've been talking for over an hour and I want to carry on and on and on. And it's great. But yeah, unfortunately, we live in the digital world. All the statistics say, you know, after an hour, just, you know.
Oh, yeah. If
people
even
drop
that
off.
Even that long, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I did want to ask you, finally, because you've got this incredible energy for photo books and life after National Geographic and also a thirst for learning, which I love. As well. But like, you know, do you think ahead? I ask this almost all my guests, like 5, 6, 7 years. What are your ambitions, like hopes, wishes and dreams? Or are you more living in the moment?
I'm living a bit in the moment and in my stage in my life and everything. I don't know if I have the privilege of thinking 7 years from now. You never know. But I mean, if I could still be working with photographers and in a way that was helpful. I think also, you know, giving, when you have had a life in photography like I have, being able to give back to people and share your experience and your knowledge. Like, thank you very much for this opportunity. And if it's helpful for people, I mean, that's life's greatest reward for me. And if I can continue to do that, whether it's books or teaching or who knows what could come next, I will be a very lucky and grateful person.
Wow, that's beautiful. And thank you so much. And yeah, I feel like this is a privilege as well, being able to get to talk to people like you. And I get such nice feedback from photographers about this podcast, and I'm sure I'm going to get so much more. And it's been such a pleasure talking with you. I definitely would love to, get you back on, see where you are in a year or two.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
Yeah, good luck with everything. And yeah, we'll put loads of links out to, your workshops and in the show notes on the page of my podcast.
Thank you. I look forward to your next book, and I want to hear all about this workshop you're doing, this bookmaking workshop too.
Yeah,
I want to take a bookmaking workshop, so that's on my list.
Great. Well, if you make a trip to London, you have to time it around one of them, and it would be great to have you on for sure.
Oh, pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, and we'll catch up again soon. Take care.
Absolutely. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Sarah. What a treat to have such a rich conversation, hear Sarah's stories, and I particularly love hearing about her continued thirst for knowledge and saying yes. It's such a good lesson for us all, and there's so much in there. So if you enjoyed that, please share it with your community, spread the word about Sarah, this podcast, and there are plenty of links on her page, on my website, in the podcast section. So just head there to check them out, find out more about Sarah. And if you're really lucky, maybe you can get to go on one of her workshops. That's it from me. Until next time, stay focused.